grand theater of corporate life, trust is the most expensive currency, and sometimes you only realize you're bankrupt when the silence of a friend becomes louder than the accusation of an enemy. From the 47th floor of the Sterling Designs Tower, New York City sprawled below like a blanket of fractured diamonds, a concrete jungle that promised to make kings of those who dared to build. But for Alex Miller, standing in the center of that glass-walled cathedral of ambition, the city had never felt more distant, more hostile. The air in Marcus Vance's office was cold, sterile, smelling faintly of expensive leather and betrayal. On the vast mahogany desk that separated the two men lay the blueprints for the Nexus, a skyscraper so elegant, so revolutionary, it was destined to become a legend. It was Alex's soul, rendered in ink and paper. Marcus, his boss, his mentor, leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm authority. His voice, usually so full of warmth and encouragement, was now a blade of ice. "We're terminating your contract, Alex. Effective immediately." The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air, nonsensical, alien. Alex could only stare, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. Termination? It had to be a mistake, a cruel, incomprehensible joke. Marcus continued, his tone clinical, as if discussing a minor budget adjustment. "There's been a serious breach of the confidentiality clause. Evidence shows that core design elements of the Nexus were leaked to a competitor." He paused, letting the accusations settle like poison in the room. "And all trails lead back to you." Alex's gaze darted from Marcus's unreadable face to the blueprints, his masterpiece, now twisted into a weapon against him. He opened his mouth to deny it, to fight, to scream, but his eyes found Sarah. She stood near the window, partially hidden behind Marcus, her arms crossed tightly. Sarah, his closest friend, the one who had shared midnight coffees and whispered dreams of changing the world with him, one building at a time. He searched for her eyes, pleading for an ally, a witness, a friend, but she wouldn't look at him. She stared intently at the skyline, as if finding a sudden, profound interest in a random rooftop across town. Her silence was a confession. It was a roar that deafened him, a physical blow that shattered something deep inside. In that moment, he understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was an execution. And the person he trusted most in the world was holding the axe. He had lost his job, his reputation, and his friend in the span of a single heartbeat. Without a word, Alex turned and walked out of the office, the silent click of the closing door echoing the final, devastating collapse of his world. To understand the depth of the wound, you must first understand the anatomy of the trust that was broken. Long before the cold silence of that final meeting, there was the warmth of a partnership, a bond forged in the creative fires of Sterling Designs. This story doesn't begin with an ending, but with a promising and deceptive beginning. 2 years earlier, Alex Miller was the firm's best-kept secret. He was a ghost in their brilliant machine, a quiet force who spoke not in meetings, but through the elegant, breathtaking lines he drew. He came from Queens, a world away from the Manhattan penthouses Sterling Designs catered to. His father was a subway conductor, his mother a librarian. Growing up, his playground was the view from the elevated train, watching the city's steel titans rise and fall. He didn't have the pedigree of his Ivy League colleagues, but he had something far more valuable, a vision. He could see the soul in a structure, the poetry in a steel beam, the human story in a floor plan. He was soft-spoken, almost shy, preferring the company of his drafting software to the firm's boisterous happy hours. For Alex, the work was everything. It was a pure, unfiltered expression of who he was. And the man who claimed to understand that, the man who discovered him, was Marcus Vance. Marcus was the antithesis of Alex. He was all polish and performance. He wore tailored suits that cost more than Alex's rent, and he possessed a smile that could disarm the most hostile client. He was the senior vice president, the firm's golden boy, the charismatic frontman who could sell a sketch on a napkin as the future of architecture. But Marcus had a secret of his own, one he guarded with a ferocious, deep-seated insecurity. He was a curator of talent, not a creator of it. He couldn't build the monuments he sold. He recognized genius instantly, not with the admiration of a fellow artist, but with the sharp eye of a prospector finding a rich vein of gold. And in Alex Miller, he had hit the mother lode. He took Alex under his wing, cultivating a mentor-protege relationship with meticulous care. He would praise Alex's work in private, using intoxicating words. "You're a generational talent, kid," he'd say, leaning over Alex's desk late at night. "I'm just the showman. You are the magic." For Alex, who had spent his life feeling like an outsider, this validation was a powerful drug. He revered Marcus, saw him as a champion who had given him a chance to paint on the grandest canvas in the world. He trusted him implicitly, handing over his most innovative ideas, his most audacious concepts, believing they were partners on a shared journey to greatness. The third point in their triangle was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was sharp, witty, and ambitious, but she was also Alex's anchor. They had started at the firm around the same time, two junior designers trying to stay afloat in a sea of sharks. They were an inseparable pair, their desks a shared mess of coffee cups, blueprints, and takeout containers. Sarah understood Alex's quiet language. She could read the frustration in the tense line of his shoulders or the excitement in the way his pen flew across the screen. She was his advocate, his translator, often taking Alex's complex, brilliant thoughts and framing them in a way the corporate brass could understand. "What Alex is trying to say," she would begin, before launching into a perfect, concise pitch that made everyone nod in agreement. Their friendship felt absolute, a safe harbor in the storm of their demanding careers. To Alex, Sarah was more than a colleague. She was family. The dynamic between the three was a perfectly calibrated and deeply unhealthy ecosystem. It was a system that produced incredible results, built on Alex's genius, Sarah's support, and Marcus's salesmanship. A prime example was the Helios Tower project a year prior. The client, a notoriously difficult billionaire, was about to pull the plug, calling their latest proposal uninspired. Panic swept the boardroom. As Marcus floundered, trying to salvage the deal with empty charm, Alex was in the adjacent design studio, watching the meeting on a live feed. He saw the problem, the flaw in the client's own logic. He grabbed a stylus and, on a digital tablet, sketched a radical new atrium design. In less than 5 minutes, a cascade of glass and light that not only solved the structural issue, but was also a work of art. Sarah, standing beside him, saw the spark of genius. She took the tablet, walked calmly into the boardroom, and placed it in front of Marcus, whispering, "A thought I just had." Marcus didn't miss a beat. His eyes lit up as he absorbed the design. He turned to the client and presented Alex's idea as a spontaneous epiphany, a sudden stroke of brilliance born from the client's own incisive critique. He sold it with the passion of a convert, and the client was enthralled. The deal was saved. Later that evening, Marcus found Alex and Sarah working late. He didn't mention it in front of the team, of course. Instead, he draped an arm around Alex's shoulders. "We did it," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial hum. "That was your genius, my friend. Pure and simple. I just put the frame on the masterpiece." He then looked at Sarah. "And you, the perfect assist. You two are my dream team." He promised them both lavish bonuses and, more importantly, a future. He made Alex feel like the secret hero, the power behind the throne. And for the humble kid from Queens, that was enough. He didn't need the public glory, not when his mentor saw his true worth. Sarah smiled, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Perhaps she saw the inequity, the subtle theft of credit, but she also saw her friend, happy and validated. So she said nothing, becoming a silent party to the arrangement. This was the foundation upon which their greatest project and Alex's greatest tragedy would be built. It was in this fertile ground of hidden genius, quiet complicity, and charismatic ambition that Marcus Vance planted the seeds for the Nexus, the project he swore would finally put Alex's name up in lights, right next to his own. Alex, blissfully unaware, believed him. He believed he was designing a tower of glass and steel, never realizing he was also drafting the intricate, devastating blueprint of his own betrayal. The announcement of the Nexus project descended upon Sterling Designs not as a memo, but as an event. It was a seismic shift in the office's atmosphere, a sudden charge of electricity that made the air hum with ambition. This wasn't just another luxury high-rise. It was a bid for immortality. The project was a multi-billion-dollar, skyline-defining monolith that promised to be the new crown jewel of New York City. For the architects at the firm, landing a significant role on the Nexus was akin to a film actor being cast in a Scorsese epic. It was a career maker, a name etcher, the kind of project that would be studied in textbooks for a century. Speculation ran rampant in the hallways and over hushed lunches. Who would lead it? Whose vision would shape the future? For Alex Miller, it was a distant, beautiful dream. He assumed he'd contribute, perhaps designing a clever HVAC system or an efficient floor plan. But the lead, that was for the titans of the industry. That assumption was shattered one evening, a week after the official announcement. The office had mostly cleared out, leaving only the hum of servers and the glow of scattered desk lamps. Alex and Sarah were packing up when Marcus's assistant appeared, requesting their presence in his office. The office, with its panoramic view of the twinkling cityscape, felt more like a throne room than a workspace. Marcus was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, looking every bit the king surveying his domain. He smiled as they entered, a gesture of warmth that immediately put Alex at ease. "Close the door," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur. He poured 2 more glasses of what Alex recognized as an obscenely expensive single malt scotch. "Tonight, we don't just drink, we make history." He handed them their glasses, his eyes locking onto Alex's. "The board has approved my leadership proposal for the Nexus. I'll be the face of it. I'll handle the investors, the politicians, the press, all the noise." He took a slow sip, letting the moment hang in the air. But a project this important needs more than a salesman. It needs a soul. It needs a true artist to give it life. He stepped closer to Alex, his expression one of profound sincerity. "It needs you, Alex. I'm not asking you to be on the team. I'm asking you to be the heart of the team. I want you to be the lead designer. Every line, every curve, every innovation will come from you." Alex was stunned into silence, the expensive scotch forgotten in his hand. He glanced at Sarah, who was beaming, her eyes shining with pride for her friend. Before Alex could even process the offer, Marcus raised a hand, pressing on. "And let's be perfectly clear. This isn't one of those deals where you do the work and I get the credit. This is your ascension." He set his glass down and leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, sealing the promise. "The moment we break ground, the firm will issue a press release. It will announce the promotion of our newest creative partner, Alex Miller. Your name will be on the architectural digests, on the articles, on the goddamn plaque in the lobby. Your vision, your credit, your legacy. I've had my time in the sun. This is your moment. I'm just here to hold the door open for you." He stuck out his hand. "So, are you ready to build the future with me, partner?" The word partner reverberated through Alex's entire being. It was everything he had ever worked for, everything he had ever dreamed of, handed to him in a crystal glass. He shook Marcus's hand, his own feeling small and calloused in Marcus's smooth, manicured grip. "Yes," Alex managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely yes." They raised their glasses, the 3 of them, and toasted. "To the Nexus," Marcus declared. But for Alex, he was toasting to a future he finally believed was his. From that night on, the Nexus became Alex's entire world. He didn't just work on the project, he fused with it. His small apartment became a satellite office, the walls disappearing behind layers of sketches, structural calculations, and 3D printed models. He slept on a cot in his office 3 or 4 nights a week, waking from dreams with solutions to complex engineering problems. He saw the building in his mind, not as a static object, but as a living entity. He designed a revolutionary crystalline facade with kinetic panels that would shift subtly with the sun's position, allowing the building to breathe and regulate its own temperature. He devised an internal superstructure inspired by the biology of a dragonfly's wing, giving it both immense strength and impossible lightness. His dedication was absolute. When a headhunter from a world-renowned rival firm called with a staggering offer, Alex cut him off politely. "Thank you, but I'm exactly where I need to be." His loyalty to Marcus and Sterling Designs was unwavering. He was living the promise. Marcus, for his part, played the role of the proud mentor to perfection. In high-stakes meetings with investors, when a technical question about fluid dynamics or material stress would leave him adrift, he would gesture smoothly towards Alex. "Alex, why don't you walk our partners through your brilliant solution for the vortex shedding at the upper levels?" And Alex, though nervous in the spotlight, would speak with the quiet authority of someone who knew the subject intimately. He would captivate the room not with charisma, but with the sheer, undeniable elegance of his logic. The investors would leave impressed, and Marcus would beam. "You see," he'd say in the elevator, "I get them in the room. You show them the magic. We're invincible." The peak of this golden era came on a warm autumn evening. They had just won a prestigious pre-construction design award, a major coup that silenced any doubters about the project's viability. The three of them, Alex, Marcus, and Sarah, found themselves on the rooftop terrace of the Sterling building, celebrating with a bottle of champagne. The city was a tapestry of light at their feet. Marcus pointed towards a dark gap in the glittering skyline. "Right there," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "That's where it will be. They'll see it from the plane's landing at JFK, a new star in the constellation." He turned and put a hand on Alex's shoulder, his grip firm. "That's not our legacy, Alex. That's yours, and everyone is going to know it." Looking at the empty space in the sky, with his best friend by his side and his mentor championing his name, Alex felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. He was standing on the pinnacle, gazing at the promised land. He had no idea he was also standing on the edge of a cliff, and the gentle hand on his back was already measuring the force of the push to come. The euphoria of a promise, like the view from a great height, cannot last forever. Eventually, reality sets in, with all its messy, complicated details. As the Nexus transitioned from a beautiful, abstract dream into a colossal undertaking of logistics, budgets, and billion-dollar contracts, the clean lines of Alex's vision began to intersect with the murky realities of Marcus Vance's business. The project was entering its most critical phase, a relentless churn of deadlines and decisions. And it was in the grinding of these corporate gears that the first hairline cracks began to appear in the flawless facade of Alex's new world. The first anomaly was small, almost insignificant, a single line item in a quarterly budget report thick enough to be a doorstop. Alex wasn't an accountant, but his mind was wired to see patterns, to notice when a single element was out of place. Tucked away in a section on third-party consulting fees was a recurring seven-figure payment to an entity he'd never heard of, Vance Strategic Solutions, LLC. It wasn't a subcontractor, not an engineering firm, not a materials supplier. He felt a flicker of curiosity and brought it up with Marcus during a brief moment of calm, pointing to the line on his tablet. "Hey Marcus, who is VSS? I haven't seen them in any of our design meetings." Marcus glanced at the screen and let out a dismissive laugh, waving his hand as if shooing away a fly. "Ah, that. Don't you worry your brilliant head about that, Alex. That's the boring stuff. Let me wrestle with the bean counters and the tax lawyers. You just keep making magic." He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "It's a holding company, tax efficiency, asset protection. Way above our pay grade, believe me. Just corporate plumbing." The explanation was smooth, confident, and utterly plausible. Alex, who knew far more about tensile strength than tax shelters, nodded and let it go. And yet, a tiny, dissonant note lingered. It was the first time Marcus had ever so explicitly walled off a piece of the project, the first time he had used the phrase "above your pay grade." It felt less like a protection and more like a locked door. The second crack came not from a spreadsheet, but from a person. David Chen was a senior architect, a quiet, weary man who had been the firm's leading light a decade ago. He was a brilliant designer in his own right, but he lacked the killer instinct, the political savvy, to navigate the firm's upper echelons. He had seen stars like Marcus rise, and he knew what they fed on. One evening, as Alex was hunched over a light table, meticulously reviewing a wiring schematic, David paused by his desk. He looked at Alex, then at the mountain of work surrounding him, and a sad, knowing look crossed his face. "You're a hell of a talent, kid," David said, his voice barely a whisper, "the purest I've seen in 30 years. He paused, picking up a small, 3D printed model of a support joist, admiring its complexity. "Let me give you some advice. When you work for a storyteller, remember that the show is always more important than the truth. Marcus tells the best stories in the business. Just make sure you know what your role island, and make sure he doesn't decide to write you out of the final act." The words stung Alex, striking a nerve he didn't know was exposed. He felt a surge of defensiveness on Marcus's behalf. "Marcus has been my biggest champion," Alex replied, his tone a little too sharp. David just gave a slight, non-committal shrug, placed the model back on the desk, and walked away. Alex immediately dismissed the comment as the sour grapes of a man who had been eclipsed by a younger talent. It was professional jealousy, plain and simple. Still, the strange metaphor Marcus as a storyteller, and he, a character in the story, was unsettling. It clung to the back of his mind, a whisper he couldn't quite shake. But the most painful crack, the one that truly began to splinter his reality, was the slow, almost imperceptible drifting of Sarah. Their effortless friendship, once the bedrock of his professional life, began to feel strained. It started with closed doors. He'd see her walking into Marcus's office, and the heavy oak door would click shut behind her. Their meetings grew longer, more frequent. When he'd catch her at the coffee machine later, he'd ask how it went. "Oh, you know," she'd say, her eyes scanning her phone. "Just budget reviews. Marcus needed me to walk him through the new materials cost projections." The explanations were always logical, always professional, but they lacked the color and detail of their old conversations. The collaborative we that had once defined their work was quietly being replaced by a more distant corporate dynamic. The shift became undeniable one afternoon. Alex had a breakthrough, a solution for the building's complex aerodynamics that would save millions, and was, in his opinion, the most elegant piece of design he'd ever produced. He felt that familiar jolt of pure creation and immediately went to find Sarah, his first and most important audience. He found her just leaving another closed-door session with Marcus. "Sarah, you have to see this," he began, unrolling a printout on a nearby table. "I figured out the oscillation problem." She looked, but her focus was elsewhere. Her phone buzzed. "Wow, Alex, that's really clever," she said, her praise feeling rote, distracted. "Listen, that's great, but can we circle back on this? Marcus just handed me the entire Q4 expenditure analysis, and he needs it by tomorrow morning. I'm totally buried." She gave him a quick, apologetic smile before hurrying off to her desk. Alex stood alone in the hallway, the blueprint, his moment of triumph, feeling suddenly foolish in his hands. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. The shared spark, the immediate, infectious excitement that had always passed between them, was gone. It had been replaced by deadlines and priorities that he was no longer a part of. He was being compartmentalized, managed. A profound and unfamiliar sense of isolation washed over him. He looked at the design for his magnificent tower, a beacon of connection and community, and had never felt more alone. He rolled up the blueprint, pushing the feeling down, telling himself it was just the pressure. Everyone was stressed. They were building a monument, and sacrifices had to be made. He still clung to the promise of the pinnacle, refusing to believe that the whispers he was hearing were the sound of the foundation beneath him beginning to crumble. The final weeks leading up to the main investor presentation were a blur of sleepless nights and adrenaline-fueled days. The Nexus project had coalesced into something magnificent, a tangible reality that existed in stunningly detailed renders and intricate physical models. A palpable sense of impending victory hummed through the office. The team, united under the immense pressure, moved with a single purpose. At the center of it all was Alex, the quiet conductor of this grand symphony of steel and glass. He was exhausted but deeply fulfilled, meticulously refining every last detail of the presentation that would cement their legacy. He felt the weight of the promise Marcus had made, and he was ready to carry it. He was on the verge of everything, standing on the summit, admiring the view just before the avalanche. The avalanche began not with a rumble, but with a single sharp crack that split their world in two. It came in the form of a press release from Archer Global, their most formidable competitor. They announced a new landmark tower for a development in Dubai. And there, on the front page of every major architectural journal, was a render of a building featuring a kinetic, crystalline facade that shifted with the sun. It wasn't just similar to Alex's signature innovation for the Nexus. It was his innovation. The unique geometry, the specific panel mechanics, the very soul of his design was staring back at him from a competitor's project, an ocean away. The news hit Sterling Designs like a physical impact. A wave of shocked silence was followed by a tsunami of chaos. Phones began to ring with the shrill urgency of a fire alarm. Senior partners stormed in and out of offices, their faces grim. The project's primary investors were on the line, their voices dripping with ice and fury. The Nexus, their billion-dollar masterpiece, was now tainted, its most revolutionary feature stolen and revealed to the world. The project, and perhaps the firm itself, was suddenly in mortal danger. Amidst the pandemonium, Marcus Vance was an island of chilling calm. He convened an emergency meeting in the main boardroom, his face a mask of controlled, righteous fury. He stood before the terrified Nexus team, his presence commanding. "I know you are all shocked," he began, his voice low and steady, cutting through the anxiety. "So am I. What we are witnessing is not a coincidence. It is an act of industrial espionage. It is an act of profound betrayal." He swept his gaze across the room, letting the weight of his words land on each person. "There is a snake in this garden. Someone in this room, someone we have worked with, someone we have trusted, has sold our future for a handful of silver. And I promise you all, I will find them. I will personally lead this investigation, and we will cut this poison out of our firm before it spreads another inch." He was magnificent in his anger, a general rallying his besieged troops. Alex felt a surge of gratitude for his leadership, never once imagining that the general was secretly the enemy, and that the hunt had already been decided, the quarry already chosen. The investigation was swift and brutal. Marcus enlisted the firm's top IT security team, directing their focus with surgical precision. Within 24 hours, they discovered the source. Buried deep within the fragmented data of Alex's workstation hard drive was a series of encrypted, partially deleted email drafts. When reconstructed, they appeared to show a cryptic correspondence with an executive at Archer Global. The language was technical, using phrases and design shorthand unique to Alex's process, making the fabrication horribly convincing. It was a digital ghost, a phantom of betrayal expertly planted in the heart of Alex's digital life. While it dug through the virtual evidence, an anonymous email was sent to the head of Human Resources, suggesting a review of Alex Miller's financial records for unusual activity. The tip led them to a wire transfer, made 2 weeks prior. A sum of $250,000 had been deposited into Alex's personal checking account from a nebulously named offshore corporation. It was a masterful move. The money was undeniably there, a motive made tangible, while its untraceable origins made it impossible for Alex to disprove. The trap had been set, the bait taken, and the steel jaws were ready to snap shut. The final act took place the following afternoon. The entire Nexus team and the firm's senior leadership were summoned back to the main boardroom. The mood was no longer panicked, but somber, funereal. A verdict was coming. Marcus stood at the head of the long table, not as a general this time, but as a heartbroken father. His shoulders slumped, his face etched with a deep, personal sorrow. "This is one of the most difficult days of my career," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I have always believed that the foundation of this company isn't concrete or steel, but trust. And that trust has been shattered." He paused, looking around the room, letting his apparent pain wash over the silent audience. "Our investigation is complete," he continued. "We found the source of the leak. It came from right here, from the very core of our team. From a person I personally recruited, a person I mentored. a person I was proud to one day call my partner. As he spoke, a slow, sickening realization began to dawn on Alex. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues turning towards him, first with confusion, then with dawning suspicion. He felt cold, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. This couldn't be happening. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but Marcus was already moving to the climax of his performance. He nodded to an assistant, and the large screen behind him flickered to life. Projected for all to see was a screenshot of the fabricated email. Then, a redacted bank statement showing the $250,000 deposit. A collective gasp went through the room. The evidence was stark, simple, and damning. Marcus finally turned his gaze directly to Alex, his eyes not filled with anger, but with a look of profound, theatrical betrayal that twisted the knife deeper than any accusation. "I just don't understand why, Alex," Marcus said, his voice breaking just enough to be utterly convincing. "After everything we built, after everything I promised you, why would you do this to us?" To me, the blueprint for betrayal was now complete. In a matter of minutes, Alex had been irrevocably transformed from the project's hero into its most despicable villain. He was speechless, paralyzed by the sheer audacity and cruelty of the frame-up. He looked desperately towards Sarah, his last hope, but she was staring down at the table, her face ashen, refusing to meet his eyes. Her silence was his final condemnation. The story was told, the villain was cast, and the whispers in the walls had become a deafening public verdict. The verdict delivered in that boardroom was not the end, it was merely the beginning of the execution. The moment Marcus finished his heart-wrenching performance, Alex's world dissolved into a series of cold, efficient motions. 2 security guards, men he'd shared polite nods with in the lobby for years, appeared at his side. Their faces were impassive, their presence a sudden, brutal wall between him and his entire life. The firm's head of HR, a woman who had onboarded him with a warm smile, slid a termination agreement across the table, her eyes refusing to meet his. He was asked for his security badge, his company phone, his laptop. Each item he surrendered felt like a piece of his identity being stripped away. The walk from the boardroom to his desk was the longest of his life. It was a walk through a graveyard of his own making, where all the ghosts were still living. Heads that would normally have looked up with a friendly greeting remained fixed on their screens. The familiar, energetic buzz of the design floor had been replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. Colleagues he had mentored, friends he had shared lunches with, the very people who had admired his work just yesterday, now looked through him as if he were made of glass. It was a social death, swift and absolute. He wasn't even allowed the dignity of packing his own belongings. "Your personal effects will be cataloged and sent to your home address," the HR manager stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. He was a contamination to be purged. Flanked by the 2 guards, he was escorted into the elevator, and as the polished steel doors slid shut, he saw the final image of his career: the bustling office, his empty chair, and the averted gazes of everyone he had ever known. But Marcus Vance was not a man who left things to chance. Firing Alex was not enough, he had to be erased. His name had to become a cautionary tale, a synonym for treachery. In the days that followed, Marcus launched a quiet, devastatingly effective campaign to salt the earth of Alex's career. He picked up the phone, his voice a carefully calibrated instrument of sorrow and concern. He called the CEO of Archer Global, the very firm they had supposedly leaked to. "Robert," he'd say, "I'm calling out of professional courtesy. We had a breach." The architect was Alex Miller. Yes, the kid is a phenom, which is what makes this so tragic. He got an offer he couldn't refuse, I suppose. Broke my damn heart. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of the kind of ethics at play. He wasn't just warning them off, he was inoculating them against any future attempt by Alex to clear his name, painting himself as the noble, wounded victim. He had lunch with powerful developers, attended industry galas, and at each stop, he would retell the story, each time with more pathos, cementing the narrative of Alex, the brilliant but corrupt protege. Unaware of the poison being systematically injected into his reputation, Alex tried to fight back the only way he knew how, with his work. After a week of numb disbelief, He updated his portfolio, a stunning collection of work that any firm would have killed for, and began sending it out. The initial responses were flickers of hope in the darkness. A recruiter from a top Chicago firm called him, breathless with excitement. "Mr. Miller, your portfolio is, without exaggeration, one of the most compelling I have ever seen. We have a senior designer position that you would be perfect for." A hiring manager in San Francisco was equally effusive, scheduling an interview and praising his vision. For a brief moment, Alex believed that his talent could transcend the lie. The hope was short-lived. The recruiter from Chicago called back 2 days later, his voice now formal and cool. "I'm afraid the position has been filled," he said curtly. The interview in San Francisco was abruptly canceled via a one-sentence email. A promising conversation with a boutique firm in Boston went from a near offer to complete silence overnight. The pattern was unmistakable. They would see his work and be dazzled, but then they would make a phone call. They would do their due diligence, and they would hear the story that Marcus had so carefully crafted, and the door would slam shut. He was no longer a candidate. He was a liability. His name was now toxic, radioactive. The professional exile quickly bled into his personal life. He reached out to former colleagues, people he had considered genuine friends, hoping for a reference, or at the very least, a conversation. His calls went to voicemail. His texts were either ignored or met with short, sterile replies. "Sorry to hear what happened. Hope you land on your feet." It was the corporate equivalent of a get-well card sent to a terminal patient. He was an outcast, a pariah in the only world he had ever wanted to belong to. The final, soul-crushing blow arrived 3 weeks after his termination, delivered by the cold glow of his laptop screen. It was an industry press release, announced with corporate fanfare. Sterling Designs promotes Sarah Jenkins to creative director, Nexus Tower Project. The article featured a picture of her, standing beside Marcus, smiling. She was wearing a new, impeccably tailored suit, and she looked powerful, confident, and completely at ease. The promise Marcus had made to him, the title, the position, the credit, was now hers. The last vestiges of Alex's denial crumbled into dust. This was the explanation for her silence in the boardroom, for her averted eyes, for the secret meetings. Her friendship had been a transaction, and her ambition had been the final bidder. She had not been a bystander to his execution. She had been a beneficiary. She had watched him be led to the gallows, knowing that she would be the one to inherit the crown. He was completely, utterly alone, stripped of his work, his reputation, and the last person on earth he thought he could trust. The exile was now complete. He was not just fired, not just unemployed. He had been written out of his own story. The weeks that followed bled into a monotonous gray tapestry of despair. Alex's small Queens apartment, once a haven from the city's chaos, became a self-imposed prison. The skyline he had once looked to for inspiration now felt like a monument to his failure, each towering building a silent testament to a world he was no longer a part of. The savings he had so carefully accumulated dwindled with terrifying speed, eaten away by rent, bills, and the simple cost of existing. He stopped applying for jobs, unable to bear the cycle of false hope, followed by the inevitable, deafening silence. His award-winning portfolio, the proof of his life's work, sat dormant on his laptop, a relic of a forgotten man. An official-looking envelope with a transparent window had been taped to his door. He knew it was an eviction notice, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. He was adrift in a sea of apathy, questioning everything. Was his talent even real? Or was he just a vessel for ideas that only had value when presented with Marcus Vance's charismatic smile? He felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life he was supposed to be living. His exile was so complete that the world had seemingly forgotten him. One afternoon, in a fit of bleak aimlessness, he decided to finally deal with the cardboard box from Sterling Designs. It had been sitting in a corner for over a month, a squat brown tombstone for his dead career. He cut the tape with a kitchen knife, expecting a wave of pain, but felt nothing. Inside was the predictable collection of office detritus: a branded coffee mug, a few textbooks, a stress ball shaped like a hard hat. But nestled at the bottom, wrapped in a faded piece of cloth, was something he'd forgotten he even kept at his desk. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover softened and creased with age. It had belonged to his father. His father was not an architect or an executive. He was a carpenter, a man who spoke through the grain of wood and the precision of his joints. He could build a perfect staircase with a pencil, a square, and a lifetime of knowledge stored in his calloused hands. Alex opened the notebook, and the faint, familiar scent of sawdust and linseed oil seemed to fill the sterile apartment. The pages were a map of his father's mind, filled with clean, practical sketches of dovetail joints, load-bearing trusses, and cabinetry designs. There were no grand theories or corporate philosophies, only the quiet, profound wisdom of a maker. On the inside of the front cover, written in his father's simple, blocky handwriting, was a sentence Alex had seen 1,000 times in the family workshop, but had never truly understood until this very moment. It said, "A true craftsman doesn't blame his tools, he builds a new bench." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He read them again and again. All this time, he had been blaming his broken tools, his tarnished name, his useless network, his stolen portfolio. He had been waiting for someone in the industry to offer him a space at their workbench, a chance to prove that he could still create. He saw with sudden, brutal clarity that no one was coming. The entire workshop had kicked him out and locked the door. If he wanted to work, he would have to build his own bench, from the ground up, in the middle of nowhere. The realization didn't bring him joy or a sudden burst of inspiration. It was something colder, heavier, and far more powerful. The thick fog of his despair didn't lift, but it began to coalesce, to harden into a single, sharp point of resolve. The world would not give him a path forward, so he would have to cut his own. He sat down at his laptop, the eviction notice still taped to his door, and for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of purpose. He navigated to a sprawling, anonymous online platform for freelance architects and engineers. He couldn't use his own name. Alex Miller was a ghost, a liability. He needed a new identity, one born not of ambition, but of necessity. He thought of the ancient myths he'd read as a child, tales of great builders and inventors. He chose his name carefully. Daedalus, the master craftsman of Greek legend, the genius architect who designed the labyrinth for a powerful king, only to be imprisoned within his own creation. A man who had to rely on his own ingenuity, on wax and feathers, to build wings and escape the exile the king had imposed upon him. The name felt right. It was a promise to himself. He too was in a labyrinth, and he would have to invent his own way out. Under this new moniker, he began to work. He didn't find glamour. He found the dregs of the architectural world, the small, thankless, and technically difficult jobs that large, prestigious firms would never touch. His first contract was for $75. It was to troubleshoot the flawed structural calculations for a small bus shelter in a remote town in India. His second job was designing a soundproofing system for a recording studio being built in a noisy urban basement in Brazil. He designed a complex wastewater management plan for a small eco-lodge in Costa Rica. He created blueprints for a disabled access ramp on a historic building in Scotland, a job fraught with complex regulations and spatial constraints. This was humbling, ego-crushing work. He was an award-winning architect, the visionary behind the Nexus Tower, and he was now spending 16 hours a day calculating plumbing gradients for a tenth of his old hourly rate. But with each completed task, something inside him began to shift. In this anonymous world, there were no politics, no backstabbing, no charismatic storytellers. There was only the problem and his solution. For every project he delivered, a 5-star rating would appear next to the name Daedalus. A short, simple review from a stranger halfway across the world would pop up. Excellent work, very detailed, fast turnaround, a true professional. Solved a problem we've been stuck on for months. Each piece of feedback was a nail, each completed project a plank of wood. He was building his new bench, One night, after finalizing the schematics for a particularly tricky fire escape on a building in Prague, he leaned back in his chair, the first rays of dawn painting the New York skyline in shades of gray and pink. The payment for the job, a meager $200, appeared in his account. It was just enough to cover his late electricity bill. He was exhausted, broke, and a complete unknown. But as he looked at the screen, at the name Daedalus and the unbroken line of positive reviews, a feeling he hadn't felt in a lifetime stirred within him. It wasn't happiness. It was the cold, quiet hum of control. It was the feeling of a craftsman's hands on solid wood. In the ashes of his former life, a single, tiny ember had begun to glow. The name Daedalus, once a simple shield of anonymity, began to forge a legend of its own in the digital trenches of the architectural world. Months turned into a year, then two. Alex was no longer living on the edge of eviction. He was solvent, then stable. He worked with a relentless, monastic focus. His reputation on the freelance platforms became canonical. He was the master of impossible problems, the ghost in the machine who could descend into a failing project and emerge with a solution of breathtaking elegance and efficiency. In specialized forums and late-night chat rooms for engineers and designers, whispers turned into discussions. "Has anyone here worked with Daedalus?" someone would ask. The replies would be a chorus of awe. He'd redesigned a flawed acoustic shell for a concert hall in Seoul. He'd created a modular housing system for a disaster relief NGO. He'd optimized the energy grid for an entire university campus. He was a myth, a faceless virtuoso whose work was his only signature. Alex, in turn, had been reforged in this crucible of anonymity. The naive, trusting boy from Queens was gone, replaced by a man who understood the true value of his work. He was hardened, precise, and utterly self-reliant. He had built his new bench, and it was a fortress. It was from within this fortress that he received a message unlike any other. It came through the platform's secure portal, from a client profile that was completely blank, identified only by a single letter, X. The message was terse, devoid of the usual pleasantries. "I have been observing your work for 6 months. Your solutions are not merely competent, they are a paradigm shift. I have a problem I believe only Daedalus can solve. It is not a paid contract, it is a test. Should you succeed, the compensation will be significant." Intrigued, Alex accepted. The test was a theoretical problem of staggering complexity. Design a self-sustaining, zero-waste residential arcology for 1,000 people, capable of being deployed in any climate zone on Earth. There was no client, no budget, no site plan, only the pure, naked challenge. For a solid week, Alex barely slept. He poured every lesson, every failure, every hard-won piece of knowledge into the problem. His solution was more than a blueprint. It was a manifesto. It was a living ecosystem, a perfect synergy of sustainable technology, human-centric design, and profound architectural philosophy. It was the culmination of his exile, a testament to what a mind, freed from corporate constraints, could truly create. He submitted the voluminous files and waited. The reply from X came 24 hours later. It was 2 words: exceptional, we need to speak. The conversation moved to an encrypted, text-only communication channel. Mr. X remained a complete enigma. There was no voice, no video, only crisp, dispassionate text. "Your work on the arcology test confirmed my hypothesis," the message read. "You are not just a problem solver, you are a system builder." Alex, still wary, asked what he wanted. The reply changed his life forever. "I am not looking to hire a freelancer. I am looking to fund a revolution. The architectural world is a stagnant oligarchy, a collection of glass-towered dinosaurs like Sterling Designs, more concerned with ego and profit than with progress. They celebrate storytellers, not craftsmen. I believe you have the talent and, more importantly, the necessary scars to build a firm that can shatter their complacency. I am prepared to wire $10 million to an account of your choosing." Alex stared at the message, his heart pounding. It had to be a trick, a cruel joke. "Why?" he typed back, his fingers trembling slightly. "Why me?" The answer was chilling in its conviction. "Because you have nothing to lose and everything to prove. Let us just say I have a vested interest in seeing the old guard disrupted. My investment has only one condition. You will not build another version of them. You will build their antithesis. No marble lobbies, no empty promises, no politics. You will build something lean, lethal, and brutally efficient. You will change the game. Do we have an agreement?" Alex thought of Marcus, of Sarah, of the eviction notice, and the years of lonely work. He thought of his father's notebook. This wasn't just a chance to work again, it was a chance to build a new world. "Yes," he typed, "we do." The money arrived the next day. It was real. With it, Alex Miller died, a second, final death, and a new entity was born. He established a company, giving it a name that was both a sanctuary and a statement of purpose: Elysian Designs. In the Greek myths, the Elysian fields were the paradise reserved for the souls of heroes. This would be a haven for the discarded heroes of his industry. He eschewed the soaring rents and suffocating prestige of Manhattan, instead leasing a vast, dilapidated warehouse in an industrial corner of Brooklyn. It was a brick and steel cavern, smelling of rust and rain, with grime-covered skylights. For the first month, he hired no one. With a small construction crew, he worked day and night, designing and building the studio himself. He left the brick exposed, ran conduit along the ceiling, and installed a massive, shared, central workshop. It was a place for making things, not for making impressions. With his new bench built, he began to look for his craftsmen. He did not post ads on job boards or work with recruiters. He became a hunter, stalking the same digital wilderness that had been his home. He was looking for ghosts like himself. He found an Israeli structural engineer, a woman of ferocious genius who had been fired from 3 major firms for her abrasive and insubordinate refusal to sign off on designs she deemed unsafe. He recruited a young environmental designer from Germany who had been relegated to a basement office because his radical ideas on biomimicry were commercially unviable. He found his lead visualization artist in a reclusive young man from rural Oregon who created renders of impossible beauty but whose crippling social anxiety made a traditional office environment impossible. He approached each of them not with a job offer, but with a summons. He brought them to the half-finished Brooklyn warehouse, one by one. To each of them, he made the same pitch. "Look around you," he'd say, his voice echoing in the vast space. "There are no corner offices. There are no politics. I was once told my name was worthless, that my career was over. I'm guessing someone told you something similar. They were wrong. Here, your work is the only thing that speaks for you. We give credit where it is due, and we tackle the problems no one else will. We are the outcasts, the misfits, the ghosts in the machine. Let's build something real." They all said yes. This team of brilliant, broken people became the heart of Elysian Designs. As the final workstations were installed and the servers hummed to life, Alex stood on a mezzanine overlooking the controlled chaos of his new firm. He was no longer a victim. He was the architect of a new labyrinth, a place of immense complexity and purpose. The Phoenix Protocol was active. The flight from the ashes had begun. The seeds of Elysian Designs, planted in the barren soil of Alex's exile, grew with a ferocious, untamed energy. Their Brooklyn warehouse, once a hollow cavern of brick and steel, was now a humming, vibrant ecosystem of radical creation. They operated like no other firm. There was no hierarchy, only a fluid meritocracy of ideas. They worked with the speed and agility of a tech startup, creating fully immersive virtual reality models for clients while their competitors were still sketching on paper. They won a contract for a new National Museum of Science, not with a stuffy presentation, but by inviting the judging committee into a digital walkthrough so real they could hear the echo of their footsteps in the virtual halls. Word began to spread. Elysian Designs became the insurgents of the architectural world, the Brooklyn disruptors. Articles in influential design journals began to appear, praising their audacious work and radical commitment to sustainability. They were a black box, an enigma. Their founder remained a mystery, a reclusive figure known in the press only by the initial A, a deliberate choice by Alex to keep the focus on the team's work, not on a single personality. To the outside world, they were a collective, a movement. To their clients, they were a guarantee of unparalleled innovation. While Elysian Designs ascended, a quiet, creeping stagnation was taking hold within the gleaming tower of Sterling Designs. The nexus was complete, a glittering monument on the Manhattan skyline. It had won every conceivable award, each trophy adding another layer of polish to the legend of Marcus Vance. But the triumph was hollow, for it was the fruit of a tree that was no longer there. Without Alex's creative engine, the firm's work began to lose its soul. Their new proposals were competent, professional, and utterly predictable. They were designing expensive, elegant boxes devoid of the spark that had once made them leaders. The change was palpable in the firm's sterile boardrooms. Marcus would pace before his design team, led by a perpetually stressed Sarah Jenkins, stabbing a finger at a new render on the screen. "It's not enough," he'd snap, though he lacked the vocabulary to explain why. "It needs more impact, more flair." But flair was not a design brief. It was a desperate plea for the magic he could only curate, never create. Sarah, a capable manager and a decent architect, found herself in an impossible position. She was tasked with replicating a genius she did not possess, and the pressure was slowly grinding her down. The firm was running on the fumes of its past reputation, a lumbering titan unaware that its core had begun to rot. The two firms first brushed against each other in the competitive arena of mid-level contracts. Initially, Sterling Designs won easily, their legacy and name recognition carrying the day. But then, Elysian Designs snatched a contract for a boutique hotel, a project Sterling had considered a sure thing. Marcus was annoyed, dismissing it as a fluke. "The client probably wanted something cheap and edgy," he scoffed. Then Elysian won again, this time a corporate headquarters, beating Sterling's proposal on both innovation and cost efficiency. Then they won a third. The fluke had become a pattern. Marcus's annoyance curdled into genuine concern. "Who are these people?" he demanded in a partners' meeting. "Where did they come from?" But the answer was frustratingly vague. They were a private entity funded by an unknown investor with no public face. They were a ghost, and they were beginning to haunt him. The collision course was finally set by a project of such scale and ambition, it made all others pale in comparison. Project Horizon. The city announced a plan to redevelop a vast, derelict stretch of industrial waterfront, transforming miles of decaying piers and crumbling warehouses into a futuristic, self-sustaining urban hub. It would be a city within a city, featuring residential towers, commercial centers, green spaces, and a revolutionary transportation system. It was the single largest and most prestigious architectural undertaking in North America in a generation. To win Project Horizon was to secure a legacy, to literally shape the future of New York. For Sterling Designs, it was a chance to reassert their dominance. For Elysian Designs, it was a chance to claim the throne. Both firms threw every ounce of their resources into the initial bid. The competition was a brutal gauntlet, with dozens of the world's top firms vying for the prize. The city's development committee, wanting the most innovative solution possible, whittled the list down from 30 to 10 to 5. The entire industry held its breath, waiting for the announcement of the two finalists who would proceed to a head-to-head presentation. The announcement was live-streamed. In the Brooklyn warehouse, the entire Elysian team gathered around a massive projection screen, the air thick with nervous energy. When the commissioner announced the first finalist, the esteemed and legendary Sterling Designs, a low groan went through the room. Then he continued, and the second finalist, chosen for their bold vision and groundbreaking approach to urban integration, Elysian Designs. A deafening roar erupted in the warehouse. People were jumping, hugging, shouting with pure elation. It was the ultimate validation. Alex stood in the background, a small, determined smile on his face as he watched his team of outcasts celebrate their impossible achievement. Miles away, in a silent, mahogany-paneled office, Marcus and Sarah watched the same stream. There was a quiet nod of relief when their firm was named. But when Elysian Designs was announced as their sole competitor, Marcus's face hardened. The ghost that had been nipping at his heels was now standing directly in his path, challenging him for the crown jewel of his career. The arrogant dismissal was long gone, replaced by the cold dread of a king facing a mysterious and powerful usurper. The stage was now set. It was not just a competition for a contract. It was a war between two philosophies, two worlds, two men. It was the Titan versus the Phoenix. And the Titan, blinded by his own reflection, had no idea he was about to fight the very man he had left for dead in the ashes. The day of the final presentation for Project Horizon arrived with the solemn gravity of a state occasion. The venue was the city's most imposing boardroom, a top-floor chamber in City Hall with panoramic windows that looked down upon the very waterfront the two firms proposed to transform. The air was thin and charged with a silence that felt heavier than sound. Seated at a vast oak table were the 5 members of the selection committee. The formidable deputy mayor, a titan of real estate with a reputation for merciless pragmatism, a revered urban planning professor from Columbia University, the city's fiery parks commissioner, and a billionaire philanthropist. They were the arbiters of the city's future, and their faces were unreadable masks of stone. Marcus Vance took the stage first, and he was in his element. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a man who knew he belonged in rooms like this. He was not just an architect. He was a master of ceremonies for his own inevitable triumph. The Sterling Designs presentation was a symphony of corporate power. The renders were breathtaking, depicting majestic, crystalline towers that speared the clouds' monuments to wealth and ambition. The presentation was slick, polished, and filled with impressive-sounding metrics about return on investment and luxury market absorption. Marcus spoke of legacy, of creating a timeless icon that would put the city on the map. He was selling a beautiful, expensive, and ultimately familiar dream. He was selling the Sterling Designs brand, its history, its unimpeachable reputation. As he concluded, the committee members offered polite, appreciative applause. They had seen a vision of magnificent competence. It was exactly what they had expected. Then, the commissioner announced the final presentation. And now, from Elysian Designs, its founder, Mr. Alex Miller. The name meant nothing to the committee, but for Marcus, it was a thunderbolt from a clear sky. He watched as a figure he hadn't seen in nearly 5 years walk to the podium. It was Alex, but not the timid, deferential subordinate he remembered. This man was leaner, his face was sharper, and his eyes held a calm, unshakable confidence that was entirely new. A torrent of confused thoughts flooded Marcus's mind. Miller? What is he doing here? That pathetic freelancer from the warehouse? This is his firm? A flicker of shock gave way to pure, arrogant dismissal. This was a joke. He had crushed this man. Whatever pathetic little enterprise Alex had scraped together was no match for the might of Sterling Designs. He settled back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, ready to watch a lamb walk to its own slaughter. Alex did not begin with a flashy render or a grand promise. He simply stood at the podium for a moment, his quiet presence drawing the focus of the room. He began not with a statement, but with a question. For a century, we have built cities designed to impress. But my question is this: in the 21st century, shouldn't we build cities designed to live? He clicked to his first slide. It wasn't a picture of his own project. It was a collage of recent, award-winning architectural marvels from around the globe. And nestled among them, presented without a name or label, were 2 unmistakable images: the kinetic facade of the Nexus and the cascading atrium of the Helios Tower. Marcus's smirk froze on his face. "We see a pattern of stagnation," Alex continued, his voice even and academic. He was a surgeon dissecting a patient. A successful design language emerges, and it gets replicated, refined, and repeated. We see this same curtain wall system, this particular approach to a double-height lobby, this familiar geometry in the spire. He gestured to the screen, his laser pointer hovering for a fraction of a second over a detail of the Nexus. It's a beautiful solution. It's powerful. It has won awards. But is it the only solution? Or has our industry become so comfortable with its own reflection that it has forgotten how to innovate? A cold dread began to creep up Marcus's spine. This was an attack, a subtle, brilliant, and utterly deniable attack. Alex was using Marcus's greatest stolen triumphs against him, framing them not as unique achievements, but as examples of a tired, unoriginal industry trend. He was publicly deconstructing Marcus's legacy in front of the most powerful people in the city, and Marcus couldn't say a single word in defense without tacitly admitting those designs were his. He was being intellectually disarmed, his own weapons turned against him. Having dismantled the present, Alex pivoted to the future. "Project Horizon," he said, as the screen behind him finally changed to show their proposal, "is not a monument to be looked at. It is an ecosystem to be lived in." What appeared on the screen was not a collection of gleaming towers. It was a network, a living, breathing organism. There were sleek residential buildings, yes, but they were interwoven with vertical farms, community workshops, and sprawling green roofs that connected to form a vast, elevated park. He showed them a design for modular, mixed-income housing that could be adapted as a family's needs changed. He detailed a revolutionary water reclamation system that mimicked a natural wetland, purifying the entire district's wastewater. He showed them plans for small business incubators and local markets where luxury retail was expected to be. Then, Alex played his ace. "A project of this scale isn't just an architectural challenge," he stated. "It's a social and economic one." He brought up a final slide, a detailed impact report that compared the two proposals side by side. The conventional approach will create approximately 5,000 temporary construction jobs and 2,000 permanent, low-wage service positions. He paused. "Our model creates 15,000 permanent, skilled jobs right here in the community, through the urban farms, the light manufacturing workshops, and the tech incubator hubs. The conventional approach will add 2,000 luxury condos to an already saturated market. Our model provides a direct, scalable solution to the city's affordable housing crisis without sacrificing an inch of design quality." He had completely reframed the competition. It was no longer about which project was more beautiful. It was about which project was more valuable to the city and its people. He wasn't just answering the committee's brief, he was solving their city's deepest, most intractable problems. He made Marcus's majestic towers seem like a frivolous, socially irresponsible fantasy from a bygone era. Alex concluded quietly, letting the sheer weight of his ideas settle in the room. The committee members were no longer leaning back with polite appreciation. They were leaning forward, their faces alive with intense focus. Their questions were sharp, engaged, and directed entirely at the substance of Alex's vision. They saw what he had laid before them, not just a development, but a new paradigm for urban life. Marcus sat in his chair, the blood drained from his face. The confident showman had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, stunned man. He had come prepared for a battle of aesthetics and budgets, a game he had always won. But Alex hadn't just brought a better design. He had brought a better argument. He had changed the definition of victory. In that moment, watching the city's most powerful figures engage with the man he had once dismissed as a nobody, Marcus Vance felt the ground beneath his feet give way. The chessmaster's gambit had been played, and he was staring at a board where he was already in checkmate. The weeks between the final presentation and the annual Architecture Guild Awards Gala were a strange, tense limbo. The city's decision on Project Horizon was a closely guarded secret, leaving both firms suspended in a state of anxious anticipation. The gala, then, became the de facto arena for their Cold War. It was the industry's most prestigious night, a black-tie spectacle of champagne, self-congratulation, and whispered power plays, held in the grand ballroom of a landmark hotel. This was Marcus Vance's natural habitat, a room where his charisma and reputation were currency. But tonight, he seemed on edge, the easy smile never quite reaching his eyes. He sat at the center of the Sterling Designs table, a king holding a precarious court, with a pale and withdrawn Sarah Jenkins by his side. Across the vast, glittering room sat the Elysian Designs team. They were the outsiders, the disruptors, a small island of quiet intensity in an ocean of opulence. They looked uncomfortable in their rented tuxedos and gowns, like a band of revolutionaries who had mistakenly wandered into a royal ball. Alex was with them, a calm center in their nervous energy. He watched Marcus from across the room, not with hatred, but with the dispassionate focus of a chess master observing his opponent's final predictable moves. The evening wore on, a procession of awards for projects Alex knew were mediocre and speeches he knew were insincere. Finally, the presenter, a celebrity architect with a booming voice, arrived at the night's ultimate prize. "And now," he declared, tearing open the golden envelope, "for the award that recognizes the firm that has most profoundly shaped the future of our field this year, the award for Firm of the Year." The nominees were shown on the massive screens flanking the stage: 4 established, global behemoths, and the 2 finalists for Project Horizon. Sterling Designs, the presenter read, for their triumphant completion of the Nexus. A wave of polite, expectant applause rippled through the room. This was the safe, legacy choice. And Elysian Designs, he continued, for their meteoric rise and a portfolio of paradigm-shifting, innovative work. The applause was more scattered, a murmur of curiosity for the underdog. The presenter paused for dramatic effect, and the Guild Award for the 2025 Firm of the Year goes to, he leaned into the microphone, Elysian Designs. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then, the Elysian table exploded. The team of misfits and outcasts erupted in a disbelieving, joyous roar. They had done it. They had been seen. At the Sterling table, the reaction was a mirror image of shock. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. The polite smiles of Marcus's partners vanished, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. Marcus himself looked as though he'd been physically struck, his face a tight mask of incandescent fury. It was a public humiliation, a stunning repudiation of his dominance. Alex, his face serene, calmly made his way to the stage through a sea of congratulatory hands. He accepted the heavy, ornate award, the metal cool and solid in his grasp. He stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the glittering assembly of his peers, his gaze finally resting on Marcus. The room quieted, expecting the usual breathless thank yous. They were not prepared for what came next. "Thank you," Alex began, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous ballroom. "I accept this incredible honor on behalf of the most brilliant, dedicated, and resilient team I could ever imagine. But tonight, rather than just give thanks, I want to tell you all a story. It's a story about our industry. It's about the true cost of building things. It's a story about a mentor and his apprentice." A hush fell over the crowd. This was not the speech anyone expected. At his table, Marcus felt a surge of ice-cold dread. He knew this story. This apprentice, Alex continued, was young, and he believed that talent and hard work were the only currencies that mattered. He had a mentor who was a gifted storyteller, a man who could sell a vision like no other. The apprentice poured his heart and his soul into his work, creating designs he believed would change the world. As he spoke, the massive screen behind him, which had been showing the Elysian Designs logo, flickered to life. An image appeared, an early hand-drawn concept sketch of the Helios Tower atrium. Then another, a time-stamped, dated 3D model of the Nexus's kinetic facade from a personal hard drive, created years before Sterling had ever announced the project. "The apprentice created the stories," Alex said, his voice resonating with quiet power, and the mentor told the world that the apprentice's stories were his own. The room was now utterly silent, a sea of captivated, confused faces. Marcus had gone rigid in his chair. But for the storyteller to own the story completely, Alex went on, the original author had to be erased. The mentor devised a plan, a blueprint for betrayal, built on lies and fabricated evidence. He just needed one other person to help him, someone close to the apprentice, someone whose silence would be the final nail in the coffin. Alex paused, and in that silence, a new sound filled the room. It was a voice, a woman's voice, clear and trembling with guilt, coming from the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. It was Sarah. "He made me choose," her recorded voice confessed, captured in a conversation with a former colleague she thought was private. He said it was Alex's career or mine. The leak, the bank transfer, he planted all of it, and I just stood there, I stood there and I said nothing while he destroyed him. The audio cut. A collective gasp, a tidal wave of shock, swept the room. Sarah Jenkins looked as if she had turned to stone, her face a deathly white. Everyone was now staring at Marcus, the terrible truth of the recording hanging in the air. But Alex wasn't finished. It was never just about the credit, he said, his voice dropping as he delivered the final killing blow. It was always about the money. The screen changed one last time. It now displayed a complex web of financial transactions, leaked internal documents from Sterling's accounting department. The diagram showed, with irrefutable clarity, a trail of millions of dollars being siphoned from the Nexus Project's inflated consulting budgets directly into the account of a shell corporation, Vance Strategic Solutions LLC. It was embezzlement, plain and simple, laid bare for the entire world to see. Alex stepped back from the podium, the story told, the evidence presented. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't accused, he had simply revealed. "My name is Alex Miller," he said, his voice ringing with a strength no one in that room had ever heard from him before. "And I was that apprentice. The truth, I have learned, is the one structure that can bear any weight and withstand any storm. Thank you." He picked up his award and walked off the stage. The silence he left behind was a vacuum, a void of pure shock. Then, a low murmur began, swelling into a roar of conversation, of outrage, of scandal. Marcus Vance sat paralyzed, exposed by the hot glare of the stage lights. His empire of lies, his carefully constructed persona, his entire career, had been publicly and systematically demolished in 5 devastating minutes. The reckoning was over. The ghost had returned, not for revenge, but for the truth. And the truth had burned the whole, rotten structure to the ground. The shockwave from Alex's speech at the awards gala was not merely a scandal, it was an extinction-level event for Sterling Designs. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. In the moments after the revelation, Marcus Vance, the golden boy of architecture, was reduced to a pale, sweating pariah. He was seen attempting a graceless escape through a service exit, only to be met by the flashing cameras of industry journalists who smelled the blood in the water. Sarah Jenkins was left abandoned at the wreckage of their table, a ghost at a feast of her own making, her face a mask of vacant ruin. The aftermath was a swift and brutal dismantling of an empire. The following morning, Sterling Designs partners invoked an emergency ethics clause and summarily fired Marcus. Within a week, the district attorney's office launched a formal criminal investigation into his financial dealings. Clients, terrified of the toxic association, pulled out of billion-dollar contracts. The great titan of architecture, built on a foundation of lies, crumbled into dust and litigation. Sarah Jenkins resigned quietly and vanished from the industry, her name becoming a quiet synonym for compromised ambition. In stark contrast, as the old world burned, a new one was being forged in the heart of Brooklyn. The day after the gala, the city's official announcement came like a coronation. The Project Horizon contract was awarded to Elysian Designs. The victory was no longer just a business transaction, it was a moral mandate. The warehouse studio, once a refuge for outcasts, became the new epicenter of the architectural universe. The story of Alex Miller, the ghost who returned to slay the king, was on the cover of every design magazine. Their phones rang incessantly, with offers from the industry's brightest talents, all of them eager to join the revolution. Months later, a celebration was held in the bustling, transformed warehouse. The team was celebrating the official groundbreaking of Project Horizon. The cavernous space, once a symbol of defiance, was now a symbol of triumph, filled with the sounds of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Alex moved through the crowd, no longer the haunted exile, but a leader, calm and assured, his quiet authority more powerful than Marcus's theatrical charisma had ever been. He raised a glass to toast his team, his family of fellow ghosts. "To the ones who were told no," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, earned pride. "We are building the future, because we are the only ones who knew it was broken." As the applause subsided, a distinguished, elderly man with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor made his way through the crowd. The team parted for him respectfully, sensing his importance, though none of them knew who he was. Alex saw him and smiled, a look of deep, genuine affection on his face. He walked over and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Everyone," Alex announced, his voice drawing the room to a hush. "There is one last person to thank. For years, our work has been made possible by a silent partner, a benefactor who believed in us when we were just a whisper. We only knew him as Mr. Teen. Tonight, I want to finally introduce you to the man who built the bench for all of us." Alex paused, letting the moment land. "Please meet Mr. Arthur Sterling." A collective, silent shock rippled through the team. Arthur Sterling, the legend, the visionary who had founded Sterling Designs half a century ago, a man who had retired from public life so long ago he was practically a myth. Arthur smiled gently at their stunned faces. "My nephew was a brilliant salesman," he began, his voice calm and steady. "So brilliant, in fact, that 15 years ago he sold his own partners on a story that I was no longer fit to lead the company I had built. He pushed me out with whispers and political games." He looked around the vibrant studio, a deep sadness in his eyes. "I watched from afar as he hollowed out my company's soul, turning it into a machine that valued image over integrity. Then, years later, I read about what he did to a gifted young architect. I recognized the tactics. I saw my own story replaying, and I decided that the story of Sterling Designs would not end with his greed." He turned his gaze to Alex. "I saw in Alex's anonymous work the same fire I had when I was his age. So I made a quiet investment. I knew he wouldn't just build a successful company, he would build a better one. He would reclaim a legacy. The Sterling name was never meant to be about power or prestige. It was meant to be about the simple, honest craft of building things that matter. And that," he said, his voice swelling with pride as he looked at the faces of the Elysian team, "is what all of you are doing here. You are the true legacy." It was not a tale of revenge, it was a story of restoration. Later that night, with the party winding down, Alex stood on the mezzanine overlooking the studio. Below, the blueprints for Project Horizon were spread across the tables like maps to a new world. From his office window, the Manhattan skyline glittered, no longer a symbol of his rejection, but a canvas awaiting his mark. He thought of the long, silent years, the crushing weight of despair, and the single, simple sentence in his father's notebook that had changed everything. "They tried to bury my name," he thought to himself, "but they forgot my name was a seed." He looked out at the city, at the endless sea of lights and lives, and knew his story was complete. And for all those who might one day face their own betrayal, their own exile, his story offered a final, quiet truth. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much, for in that silence, they are not breaking, they are planning, they are not weakening, they are sharpening. And when they finally rise, they will not just move mountains, they will build new worlds upon them. This is Kung So US. Join me next time as we explore another story hidden behind the glass doors of the corporate world.